Today's episode was a viewer request. Hey kids, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank, hoping that you are having a great day. And in today's video, I wanted to sit back with you guys, relax, and have a conversation about Nintendo. And no, this is not a video talking about the most recent Nintendo Direct, where they finally announced the Switch 2 and its pricing and the wonderful games you're going to get to play on it, including Bloodborne 2, which, I ain't gonna lie, I am very excited about. No, this video is about the other Nintendo consoles, the ones that have already released and have been released for some of them decades now. A conversation was brought up the other day over on the Discord, and at some point during that conversation, one of the guys over there asked me to rank all the Nintendo consoles. And I decided that's a good enough topic to become its own video, so here we are. And in today's video, I'm just going to be going through all the Nintendo consoles that I've played and or owned, and rank them on a scale from 1 to 5. This won't be a worst to best ranking. It'll just be how good I think the console is on its own and in comparison to other Nintendo consoles that existed at the time. So, for instance, I won't be comparing the Game Boy to the 3DS. I will instead be comparing the Game Boy to the Super Nintendo, for instance. The 3DS can be compared to the Game Boy, but not vice versa. You can't judge the Game Boy based on what came later. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you guys? I hope it does. I hope I'm not being unnecessarily complex. Anywho, for this video, I went around the garage here and dug up all the Nintendo consoles I own, or at least most of them. I'm missing like 2, and I have no idea where they're at. But I figured I wasn't going to delay this just to spend time going through totes and boxes and all that jazz. Let's just get right on into it. And where else could we start but with the original, the NES, or as I like to call it, the ultimate jank box, because this is one robust piece of shit, if I'm being completely honest. It is probably where the term Nintendium came from, because this little box can take one hell of a beating. In fact, I treat this thing like shit. I've owned this particular NES. I've owned many NESs in my life. During a 7-year period, this is a story for another video, but during a 7-year period, I owned something like 15 different NESs that would come in, and then I would buy them and then sell them and then buy them and then sell them again. And every single time there was like one small thing wrong with them, and I was able to fix it pretty easily. But this is my most recent one, and it's the one I've owned the longest, and it's also one I treat like the worst, because I've basically fucking disassembled this bad boy. It's barely held together by like 2 or 3 internal screws, and it still works just fine. Or at least it was working last time I played it like a month and a half ago. But this thing's great. I was obviously not around when the NES first came out, but this thing has some of the most iconic video games in the world first released on this thing. Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros., Metroid, Excite Bike, Paperboy, Dr. Mario, Super Mario Bros. 3. This thing, in terms of retro gaming consoles, is perhaps the most iconic. It's up there, maybe. There are a few that challenge it, but waka waka. It's got some challengers, but the NES is robust, powerful, and it's got some of the most iconic games of the 80s released for it. Not all of them were great. Not all of them were great. That sentence came out super muddled. You know, there are entire YouTubers who've dedicated their careers to talking about some of the bad games on this console, including one guy who you guys might know about him, who's made his entire career first starting off talking about some of the worst games for this thing. But even with all the bad games, it's still got some of the best. in my opinion. And considering when this thing came out and how it basically restarted the love of the video game industry, especially in the West, after the rather unfortunate situation with Atari and the video game crash, I'm going to go ahead and give this bad boy a 5 out of 5. I cannot possibly rate the NES anything less than perfect, if I'm being completely honest. This bad boy, oh, this thing is a gaming beast. Chronological order probably works best, so we're following it up with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES, the other gray box from the 80s. You might recognize this iconic design. This was the 16-bit successor to the NES, and I don't got a lot to say about the technicals. It was created as a direct response to Sega's Sega Genesis, which was... it ran a whole smear campaign against Nintendo back in the day, and this bad boy, I feel like this bad boy put them in their place, if I'm being completely honest. I have some memories of playing on this bad boy when I was younger, but I didn't actually own one until after I was out of high school, believe it or not. And part of the reason I didn't own one of these when I was younger is because I always saw the Super Nintendo as the JRPG box, because it always seemed like there was a bunch of JRPGs on it, and even when I was younger, I didn't feel like I had a lot of time for it. And I know that there actually aren't too many on the system. The ones that come to mind right now are things like Final Fantasy, Super Mario, RPG, you know, obviously nothing too crazy, nothing, you know, it wasn't a dominant genre on the console, but I don't know, whenever I was younger, it just felt like there were too many on here, and it wasn't until much later where I was super enamored with JRPGs. I was not a fan of them when I was younger. And then I played Final Fantasy VII, so there's that. Or Disgaea. I played Disgaea and Final Fantasy VII around the same time, and I fell in love with JRPGs as a result of those two games. And then I got into Tales of Symphonia. I'm going off on a tangent. Well, let's continue. The Super Nintendo has much improved graphics, sound design, and a much cleaner, much more refined library of games, if you like to judge a console based by what's on it. Which, I don't think that's fair, but it is what it is. A lot of people like to include the worst with the best when talking about the consoles, but for me, the Super Nintendo, it's not as perfect as the NES. I would give this a 4 out of 5, if only because it doesn't necessarily fill a gaming niche, except for becoming a rival to the Genesis. The Genesis was already a pretty strong 16-bit console by the time this bad boy released, and it had its own amazing library. Now, obviously, corporations are going to become corporations, and they're going to create rival products to try and secure that delicious gamer cash, as it were. So I understand why Nintendo made this, and I'm never going to, insult the Super Nintendo, but it's not as important, I think, to the history of gaming as the NES was. This was designed as a rival to the Genesis, whereas the NES was designed to save the gaming hobby after Atari's fuck-up. Moving right on along, we have, BAM! Super Nintendo. Nintendo 64, not Super Nintendo, what am I talking about? The N64. If you are not thinking about the NES when you talk about retro games, there is a chance, a decent one even, that the N64 and or the PlayStation 1 is what you think of when you talk about retro gaming in general. Retro gaming as a hobby, retro gaming as a collectible, etc. It is no exaggeration, I think, to say that the N64 has some of the most iconic video games of all time released for it. It is a revolutionary little box, bringing gaming into 3D. It wasn't the first 3D console, but it was the first good 3D console, if I'm being completely honest. And, say what you want about Nintendo's overall design choice with this thing. It is a goofy looking little blackish gray box, and let's not even get started on the controller. That thing is... I love the N64, but man, if I could fix the controller, I would. That thing was not designed by a human. But I digress. Back to the game console itself, the N64 has The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64, Super Mario 64, Donkey Kong 64 with the infamous DK rap, and it has GoldenEye 007, Majora's Mask, and so much more. Banjo-Kazooie, Killer Instinct. It's got a lot on it. This thing, for a lot of people my age, the N64 has some of their fondest memories on it. And it's so popular that Nintendo felt the need to virtually re-release the console with their Switch, which we will get to in due time. But this thing is one of the most iconic pieces of gaming history. And just like the NES, I'm going to rank this bad boy a 5 out of 5. Not just because of how good it is as a console. Its specs were solid for the time. I don't like... Does it come out? I'm not going to try to rip it out, but the memory expansion thing, I don't agree with that, but I understand why they did it. But overall, this thing is damn near perfect as a console. I don't own a Virtual Boy, but I did play one extensively for about 6 months. A neighbor of mine, actually, not too long ago, had one, and I played it. I saw it in his collection, and I was like, man, I got to try that out. And he let me borrow it for a while. And if I could give it a 0 out of 5, I would. But I'm going to be, fair and honest. 1 out of 5. Virtual reality was always a gimmick, even back then, but virtual reality pseudo 3D screen in red and black that hurts the eyes and has no good games on it, combined with a gaming console, it's theoretically handheld portable, right? But not really, because it's so awkward and it's difficult to lug around and to play with. It's just not good. It's not good. Next, we've got the GameCube, Nintendo's new age, turn of the millennium console, which had its own handle. I don't know why they gave it a handle. Like you're gonna carry this bad boy around with you in public. But this thing is my childhood. I spent so many hours toiling away on this bad boy, especially with Tales of Symphonia and Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Pokemon Coliseum. This is the console I think of when I hear the term Nintendium. Because, fun story, I'll tell it here. This is not my original GameCube from when I was a kid. I had one of the purple ones. Okay? And I'm going to be honest with you kids, I was a bit of an edgy edgelord teenager. So one day, after hearing about how indestructible the GameCube was, because someone was talking about it, I don't remember what the context was, it was forever ago. This was almost 20 years ago, guys. So, one day, I got me to see just how indestructible this thing was. So, I took it outside, I plugged it in, I turned it on, hooked it up to a TV, and I poured gasoline on it, and I lit my GameCube on fire. And to Nintendo's credit, it worked. It continued working for about 15 minutes or so. The disc thingy still spun, and the TV was still getting a signal. After about 3 or so minutes, the signal was unreadable. It was whatever. There was glitches and such. But the thing was still on after the signal blacked out, so to speak. And it still worked for about 15 minutes. I could see it. You could still see the little light thingy, the LED was on until it finally gave out. And when my mom got home and she saw what I did, I was in trouble that night. That was not a good night for me. Nowadays, the GameCube is the console for Nintendo that I spend the most time on. I try to play it at least for like a half hour every day, but I don't always get around to doing it. It's still got a lot of games on it that I just love playing. Like Coliseum, NXT, Yellow Darkness, like Twilight Princess, like Wind Waker, etc. It's just got a bunch of good games on it. And now that I have a CRT set up, this is what I try to spend a lot of time on. And Much like the NES that came before it and the N64 that came before it, this thing's getting a 5 out of 5. If I was being super impartial, which I'm not, I would deduct points for its weird disc tray design. I mean, it uses micro discs, which is just an odd choice. Especially since a lot of games of the era needed 2 discs to play. Like Resident Evil 0 needed 2 discs. The controller was definitely an improvement, though. So there's that. Overall, I just love this little bastard. I have a Wii. I just wasn't able to find my Wii. I was able to find one of the Wiimotes, though. So there is that. The Nintendo Wii was the follow-up to the Nintendo GameCube. It came out so long ago. It's a nice, it's got a nice sleek white tower design to it. Although, thinking back on it, while a lot of people didn't like it that much, I do actually genuinely prefer the later small red Wii that pops open with its own, it's got its own lid to it. I like those a lot. Much like the GameCube with its micro discs, the Wii was a very experimental game console. And I say that because if you weren't aware, a lot of Wii games used motion controls, including Skyward Sword and the Wii port of Twilight Princess, Wii Sports, and a bunch of others. And for the most part, a lot of Wii games work just fine, and most of them I would even go as far as to say are really good. Like solid games. But the Wii motion controls are kind of jank. As the years go by, they're prone to failure more often than most other controllers. In fact, not even 2 or 3 years ago, I had to completely replace 2 of the Wiimotes I had because they just weren't working right with the sensor bar. And I think that's unfortunate. I really enjoy older game consoles that are designed to last with robust pieces. A wired controller, in my opinion, is better than a wireless controller. Fight me all you want on that, boys. You ain't gonna win in this house. To be honest, I do like a lot of the Wii's library, and I like that the standard Wii is backwards compatible with GameCube games. I really like that a lot. Backwards compatibility is not something Nintendo has always been great with for a bazillion reasons, but I like that the Wii could play GameCube games if you were so inclined to do so. But overall, I would have to give the Wii a 3 out of 5. Motion controls are extremely experimental and very gimmicky even back then. The sensor bar being needlessly complicated to work with. Not needlessly complicated, a hassle. A hassle to set up. That's the word. Not complicated. It's a hassle. Because you have to get it to rest just right on the TV or close enough to the TV. You have to configure the motion controls. You have to hope that there's nothing wrong with the Wiimote itself or the nunchuck attachment. Just wire the controllers, guys. Just wire your controller into the Wii. It's so much better that way. But I digress. Moving on. Now, I was able to find my Wii U, which is 2 consoles in one. It's got the actual console itself and its fucking gamepad, which was yet another highly experimental controller type for Nintendo. If you haven't caught on by now, Nintendo's kind of the king of weird-ass controllers for their consoles. And I believe the Wii U is the weirdest one, if I'm being completely honest. This is a choice. This could have been the entire console, and I don't think there would have been a problem with it, but the fact that this was a controller for the main console, you could only really use one of these. Player 2 had to have the Wiimote. Fuck them, I guess. This fucking thing. I don't have a lot of particularly fond memories of the Wii U. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, it's only getting a 2 out of 5 for me. When it came out, I was unimpressed. Even now, years later, there are some games on it I like. I love Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was for the Wii U when it first came out, just so you guys are aware. I liked Bayonetta 2. I liked Splatoon. Is there anything else up there that I like? It's not just a Zelda game. Shantae, Half Genie Hero. I guess that counts. That's a Shantae game. Those are always good, though. That doesn't count. The Wii U, there's just not much to say. This thing was so janky, so experimental. It could play Wii games. It was backwards compatible, just like how the Wii was with the GameCube, but only to the Wii, not to the GameCube itself, which is fine. Nintendo really just didn't need to double down on the hyper gimmicky, super experimental nature with this thing. It's not terrible. It's definitely the black sheep of the family, if I'm being completely honest. Nintendo's most recent console, as of the making of this video, is the Nintendo Switch, which really does blur the line between console and handheld. You can take it with you anywhere you go. It's really small. It's really handheld. But you can also hook it up to the TV and play it on your HDMI TV. So that's nice. The Nintendo Switch is an improvement on the Wii U in basically every way. In fact, insofar as I'm concerned, this is basically what the Wii U should have been from the fucking start. Screen attached to a controller. I don't know why Nintendo felt the need to make the Wii U what it was at the time it was, but it is what it is. This thing is still hyper experimental. It's got these detachable mini controllers with their infamous Joy-Con drift and so many neat games. If I would be completely honest, this thing would get a 5 out of 5, a perfect score for Nintendo products insofar as I'm concerned, but I am personally, I do not play this thing nearly as much as I think I should. And maybe that's just because a lot of the games don't appeal to me, but I feel like it just does not control as well as a lot of Nintendo's other consoles do. And I'm not just docking a point for the Joy-Con drift, which is a problem people have talked about for basically since the thing came out. But I'm talking about just the mini controllers in when you're playing a multiplayer game, the jankiness of trying to control this controller layout just feels weird to me. If you're playing it on a bus or a park or a friend's place and you're just trying to whip out your game console to play it, it's just awkward in the hands to hold your, it's basically a phone, hold a phone out like this and play like that, you know. It's not terrible. And it is well designed. It's a nice piece of hardware. It's got a lot of amazing games. In fact, I should probably get around to finishing the most recent Zelda games because there's 2 new ones on it and I have not finished either of them. As well as Bayonetta 3. I don't think I've finished Bayonetta 3. I should get on that at some point. But yeah, it's, being completely honest, it's just awkward to control. And I know that you can fix that by taking the Joy-Cons out, putting them in the Joy-Con controller handheld thingy, and then just playing on the TV. But like, if I'm playing this thing, that it's because I have free time on my way somewhere, or I'm at a friend's house or something, you know, or I'm at the card shop between games of the tournament and I want to play on something. And this is just so awkward to hold, if I'm being completely honest. So I don't know, it's a preference thing. And you know, hit with that boomer talk all you want. And I prefer my game controllers being nice and compact and easy to use. Give me an NES controller any day of the week. The Switch 2 is not out yet, so I'm not reviewing it. So we are going to double back down now to the exclusive Nintendo handhelds. There we go. Not exclusive. What the hell am I saying? Nintendo's handheld lineup, which is pretty great, if I'm being completely honest. I don't have a Game Boy. At least I don't think I have a Game Boy lying around anywhere. But I do have a Game Boy Color. And this thing is great. Game Boy Color is, I'm not sure if it was my first gaming console I owned. I'm pretty sure it was, though. I remember getting a Game Boy Color for my birthday, alongside a copy of Link's Awakening. And man, I loved that game. The Game Boy itself would get a 3 out of 5 from me. It is a solid brick of a console, of a handheld. You could beat someone with that thing. much like the Sega Game Gear. And I want to talk about the Game Gear at some point because that thing is also a brick that you could just bludgeon someone with. But the Game Boy itself had no backlight, virtually no color. It was a monochrome screen. And while it did have an impressive game lineup, they were nothing in comparison to what was on console at the time. And I know you shouldn't be judging handhelds versus their console counterparts, but a lot of the games on the Game Boy were just not amazing. They were great, they were good games, but none of them were going to compare to what was on console at the time, you know? But Game Boy Color, that's more of a 4 out of 5. Still doesn't have a backlight, which is annoying. In fact, if you wanted to play this thing in the dark, you had to go out and get a weird wiggly little light tube and glue that to the top of it. But if I'm being honest, this is a 4 out of 5. Just because it did add actual color to your games and made you feel more like you were experiencing a video game in your hand. It still had its own issues, but overall, got a lot of good memories with this little bad boy. I don't play it nearly as much as I should. In fact, barely play them at all right now. Busy with other crap. But this, as far as Nintendo goes, this is iconic Nintendo hardware. People love this thing, and it's hard to blame them. It's so perfect. Almost perfect. Next up, we have the Game Boy Advanced and the Game Boy Advanced SP, which I technically treat as the same console, but they're not really the same thing. And, yes, I have a SpongeBob Game Boy. Leave me alone. The Game Boy Advance was I don't want to call it like the 16-bit equivalent to the Game Boy, the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy's NES, but it was, in all aspects, a strict update to the Game Boy. But it still didn't have a backlight, which really bugged me. Even when I was younger, I really hoped that this would have a backlight when I was a kid. Or, like, some way to light up the screen. I felt like Nintendo had plenty of time to get it right. And they did. They did have the time to get it right, if I'm being... Game Boy Advance has a lot more memorable titles. I shouldn't say memorable titles. A lot more titles that felt like they could have been on the Super Nintendo back in the day. In fact, there were Game Boy Advance games that were just straight up ports from the Super Nintendo. So there's that. This thing showcased how far Nintendo had come over the course of just over a decade. They were able to get a game that should be on a big clunky box and put it in the palm of your hand. And that's great. But I'm deducting points from this thing. It's only getting a 3 out of 5 because it still didn't have a goddamn screen light. And that forever bugs me. Why? But for the SP, please turn on. It's got a backlight. 5 out of 5. This is everything I ever wanted out of Game Boy. Gotta turn you off or I'll play Pokemon all night. This, in my opinion, is the quintessential handheld experience. You turn it on, you get right into the game. It's got its own backlight, it's got good sound quality, all the games are the same. You could play on this just with a backlight. This is a perfect improvement on what the Game Boy Advance has. I don't like that. That's structural weakness, and as far as I'm concerned, but it's still good. It's still very good, really playable. Battery life is fucking forever on these things. I can charge this for like 4 hours and then play it for days. This thing's insane. I love it. Yeah, 5 out of 5. This thing's great. Now, I do own a DS. It's just I have no idea where it could be, just like the Wii. And now that I think about it, it's probably in the same box as the Wii, wherever that is. The DS was a choice. It was a strict improvement over the Game Boy Advanced. Came with a dual screen bit of technology, and some games even made use of the fact that it folded on itself. One of the Zelda games for the DS required you to fold the console to solve a puzzle, which I thought was great. Confusing as hell when I was a kid, though, but I digress. I loved the fact that the 3DS, the normal DS, I love the fact that the DS was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. This was particularly useful if you were a Pokemon player, because that meant you were able to use one console to move your Pokemon from the third generation up to the fourth, which is pretty great insofar as I'm concerned. It allowed for true backwards compatibility for Pokemon, which is great. The DS also had a shitload of really good games, and much like the Game Boy Advance before it, it was a marked step forward in the processing power graphics department. You had games that were previously for the... What's a good example? Resident Evil. Resident Evil was a PlayStation 1 game. And it had a DS port, Deadly Silence, because the DS was strong enough to play PlayStation 1 games, which I know that doesn't really sound that impressive when you think about it. But remember, just 10-ish years prior, a game as advanced as Resident Evil would be something you needed a big, clunky console for. But now, Nintendo had managed to surpass that overall design and create a handheld that could play a game like Resident Evil. It's really amazing, if I'm being completely honest. I love seeing that kind of insane improvement to the gaming industry. And when Nintendo did it, it stood out. It stood out really well. I'm going to go ahead and give the DS a 5 out of 5. We've got a few of these lying around. This is the sequel handheld to the DS, the 3DS, which was such a choice. Use this one, though. This is the XL model, which just means it's bigger. The 3DS made use of advanced 3D technology. You could turn on the screen and the game would pop out at you like a 3D hologram image, which was such a sore-eyed gimmick that I am legitimately disappointed that Nintendo wanted to dedicate a whole console to it, especially after the failure of the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy showed Nintendo that people just didn't care enough about 3D VR technology, 3D technology to risk eye strain. And this thing still had the eye strain. Although, I will say, despite that, I never use this thing for its 3D gimmick. I don't play any games that use the 3D gimmick extensively. But this is besides the GameCube, this is the Nintendo console handheld that I play the most. I play this basically every day. I'm playing Disgaea DS on it right now, so that's fun. This, I shouldn't even feel this, I'll say, is the culmination of Nintendo's entire handheld library history. All of the improvements, all of the changes, all the adaptations crystallized in one final handheld. Because I don't think there's going to be another handheld from Nintendo. The Switch 2, all that jazz, it's dominated Nintendo's entire ecosystem. There's not going to be another simple handheld like this. We're not going to get something simple to play with like this. This is comfortable. The Switch is not comfortable. This gets a 5 out of 5. The Switch does not. I would deduct points for the 3D gimmick, but the 3D gimmick is optional. You can turn it off, and I think that's great. If you don't want to engage with the eye strain and the annoyance of the 3D gimmick, you don't have to, and I like that. I like what Nintendo did there. But other than one small part of the console, a handheld that you don't need to interact with, this thing's great. It's backwards compatible all the way down to the normal DS, which is great. You can play normal DS games on this. It had a eShop that is no longer functional, which not happy about that. I'm not a fan of ever losing access to gaming options. You know, if I can't legally acquire it, then we have a problem, you know what I'm saying? But it had a lot of options over the years, and because it's backwards compatible with the full DS library. The 3DS has one of the largest possible libraries of any game console in history. It's got so much going for it that it's impossible to ignore. just the options you have with this thing. So yeah, this gets a perfect score out of me. It's beautiful, it's simple to use, it's easy to play with, and it has a huge library. I love it. 5 out of 5. And that's all I've got. This was a viewer request, as I said earlier. Let's put you away. Boop. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my assessment on the various Nintendo consoles and handhelds? If you do, let me know. If you don't, let me know as well, because I'd love to hear your opinions. And of course, if you like this video, leave a like, share, subscribe, all that wonderful jazz. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.